Welcome to Thalira Tales, where stories bloom in silence, carrying emotion, mystery, and hidden truth. Step in and let the tale unfold.
My new neighbor who just moved in next door called me over at midnight. Standing in the shadows, she looked at me grimly and said, "At exactly 11 tonight, bring your daughter to my back door. No lights, no noise." Trembling, I asked her why, but she only replied, "You'll understand once you get there." When the time came, I held my fast-asleep daughter tightly and crossed the yard between our houses. But the exact moment I looked back toward my child's bedroom window from her second-floor room, I froze in absolute horror. Before we dive into the most dramatic twists ahead, thank you for being here. Your support means more than words can express. Drop a comment and let me know which city or country you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious to know who is on the other side of the screen so I can send a personal hello. Note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and life lessons. Any resemblance to names or places is purely coincidental, but the message hidden inside is definitely something you'll want to hold on to. The alarm went off at 5 in the morning, same as every day. I reached over and silenced it before it could wake Lily. That was the first thing I did every morning. Protect her sleep for just a few more minutes while I got myself together. I padded down the hallway in the dark, knowing every creak in the floorboards by heart, the third one near the bathroom, the loose one just before the kitchen. 2 years of navigating this house alone had taught me things I never expected to learn. I turned on the stove and cracked 4 eggs into the pan, scrambled the way Lily liked them. Soft in the middle, never browned. I had gotten very good at scrambled eggs. While the eggs cooked, I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the backyard. The oak tree we had planted together was taller now. It had survived 2 winters without anyone to look after it properly. I suppose that made two of us. My name is Chloe. I am 30 years old. I live in this house in Austin, Texas, with my 5-year-old daughter Lily. And for the past 2 years, it has just been the two of us. The divorce was finalized quietly, the way most painful things are. There was no big argument at the end, no dramatic scene in a lawyer's office. There was just a set of papers I signed on a Tuesday afternoon while Lily was at preschool, and then Jake was gone. Or rather, he had already been gone. He had left for overseas work nearly 2 years before that, chasing some version of our future that I had stopped believing in long before the papers ever arrived. I set the toast on the plate next to the eggs and poured a small glass of orange juice. Then I heard the sound I lived for every morning, small feet shuffling down the hallway. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway with her hair sticking up on one side and her stuffed bear tucked under her arm. She blinked at me with her big brown eyes still half asleep, and my chest did that thing it always did. That tight, full ache that I had no word for except love. "Good morning, baby girl," I said. She shuffled over without answering and climbed into her chair. I slid the plate in front of her, and she picked up her fork with the slow, deliberate focus of a child who was not yet fully awake. I sat across from her and wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. The chair to my left was empty. It had been empty for 2 years. I had thought about moving it to the garage more than once, but every time I tried something stopped me. Some stubborn, quiet part of me that was not yet ready to rearrange the furniture around his absence. I did not miss Jake. I told myself that every morning. What I missed was the idea of what we were supposed to be. The four-legged table that had become a three-legged one, and the daily work of pretending it was still sturdy. After breakfast, I got Lily dressed and walked her to the end of the driveway to wait for the school bus. She waved at me from the window as it pulled away, and I waved back until it turned the corner. Then I stood alone in the morning quiet for a moment before going back inside. The house belonged to my mother. She passed away 3 years ago, and she left everything to me. The house, the savings, the small investment portfolio she had built carefully over 30 years of working as a nurse. It was not a fortune by any measure, but it was enough. Enough to pay the bills without drowning. Enough to give Lily stability even when everything else felt unstable. I kept the important documents in a small fireproof lockbox in my bedroom closet. The deed to the house, my mother's will, the account statements. I checked on them every few months the way some people check on a sleeping child just to reassure myself they were still there. My father Thomas had a spare key to the house. I had given it to him 2 years ago when he offered to check in on us while Jake was away. He had seemed genuinely concerned back then, driving over on weekends to fix the leaky faucet in the bathroom, bringing groceries he said he had bought by accident in excess. I was grateful. I had been alone and scared, and I had needed someone. Looking back, I had needed someone so badly that I had stopped paying attention to what that someone actually was. My phone rang at 11 that morning while I was answering work emails. It was my father. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice warm in the way it sometimes was when he wanted something. "I am going to stop by this afternoon if that is all right with you." Of course, I said. "Is everything okay?" "Everything is great. There is actually someone I would like you to meet. An old colleague of mine. A good man. I think you two would get along well." I remember the small hesitation I felt, the brief flutter of something I could not name, but my father sounded cheerful and certain the way he always did when he had already made up his mind about something, and I had spent 30 years not questioning that certainty. "Okay," I said. "What time?" "Around 4," he said. "And Chloe wears something nice." I set the phone down on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then I told myself it was just a friendly visit. My father is thoughtful. My father is trying to help. I was very good at telling myself things that were not true. That afternoon at 4 minutes past 4, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I looked through the front window and saw my father stepping out of his sedan. He turned back to wait for someone on the passenger side. I smoothed my hair, took a breath, and walked to the front door. When I opened it, the man standing behind my father was smiling. He shook my hand first. That was the thing I remembered most in those early days. The firm, unhurried handshake of a man who had nothing to prove and nowhere else to be. Not the quick, perfunctory press that people offer when they are already thinking about something else. A real handshake. The kind that says, "I see you." His name was Christian. He was in his late 30s, well-dressed without being showy, in a pale blue shirt with the collar open and dark trousers that looked expensive without advertising it. He had an easy smile that reached his eyes, and he held eye contact for exactly the right amount of time. Not too long, which would have felt aggressive. Not too short, which would have felt evasive. Just long enough to communicate that you had his full attention. My father introduced him as a trusted old friend who worked as a financial consultant. He used the word good several times. A good man, a good career, a good person to know. My father said the word the way people say it when they want you to stop asking questions, and at the time I did not notice that. I stepped back and let them in. Christian walked through my front door like he had always belonged there. He looked around the entryway, the way people look at a room when they are genuinely interested in it, rather than just being polite. His eyes moving to the photographs on the wall, the small ceramic pot of succulents on the window ledge that I had spent the better part of 3 weeks trying to keep alive after killing the previous two. He smiled at the succulents. "Resilient plants," he said. "Good choice for a busy house." He asked questions that felt genuine. How long had I been in this neighborhood? Did I like it here? Was the elementary school nearby any good? Because he had a colleague with a child the same age who was looking to move to the area. Each question followed naturally from the last, the way conversation flows when someone is actually listening to your answers rather than waiting for their turn to speak. I found myself answering easily, fully, in more detail than I usually offered to someone I had just met. My father settled into the armchair in the living room, and I went to make coffee. I could hear them talking low while I moved around the kitchen, the particular murmur of two people who know each other well and have fallen back into the rhythms of an old familiarity. There was something about the sound of voices filling the space that made the house feel different, larger somehow or less hollow, like a room that had been closed for a long time and finally had air moving through it again. Lily came home on the school bus at 3:30. I heard the front door, then the familiar rush of small footsteps that I could have identified anywhere, the particular rhythm of a 5-year-old who moved through the world at full speed and saw no reason to slow down. She appeared in the kitchen doorway with her backpack still on and her hair slightly wild from the bus, scanning the room with those serious brown eyes. "There are people here," she said. "Come say hello," I told her. She considered this for a moment. Lily had always been a child who made her own assessments about new situations before committing to them. She could not be rushed into an opinion. She walked into the living room with the careful measuring look that 5-year-olds use when deciding whether to trust someone equal parts scientist and diplomat. She climbed into my father's lap first, which was her established habit, her way of claiming familiar ground before exploring new territory. My father put his arm around her automatically, but his eyes went to Christian, and something passed between the two men that I did not understand and did not try to. Then Lily turned her serious brown eyes on Christian. He did not talk down to her. That was the first thing I noticed. He did not use the high-pitched voice or the exaggerated enthusiasm that adults perform for children, the kind of performance that kids always see through because they have better instincts than we give them credit for. He just looked at her steadily, with the same attention he had given me, and asked what her stuffed bear's name was. Gerald, she said. He nodded slowly with the gravity the question deserved. Gerald is a strong name for a bear, he said. Very reliable, the kind of name you can depend on. Lily thought about this for a moment, then she almost smiled. With Lily, almost was significant. She did not give her smiles away cheaply. Within an hour, she was showing him her drawings spread across the coffee table in an arrangement that followed a logic only she understood. Within 2, she had pulled him outside to show him how high she could go on the swing, which was currently her primary measure of personal achievement. He stood at the edge of the yard with his hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression I had not seen directed at my daughter in a very long time. Not the performative delight that visitors sometimes offered the look of someone who was waiting to be released from the obligation of paying attention to a child. This was something else. The expression of someone genuinely present, genuinely interested in what this small person could do. When she ran back toward the house for water, she grabbed his hand on the way and tugged him along without asking. He let himself be pulled without hesitation, adjusting his pace to hers, which was something that not everyone thought to do. I was standing at the kitchen window, watching all of this, and I felt something move inside me. Something I had kept in a locked room for 2 years behind a door I had told myself was better left closed. It moved just slightly like a piece of furniture shifting in a space you thought was settled. My father appeared beside me. He stood close looking out at the yard, and his voice was quiet. He is good with her, my father said. He is, I agreed. My father nodded. He kept his eyes on the yard. Christian was crouching down to Lily's level now, examining something she had found in the grass, giving it the same serious attention he gave everything else. Something moved across my father's face as he watched. A flicker of something I could not immediately name. His jaw tightened for just a moment so briefly that I almost missed it. Then he turned away and picked up his coffee cup. I told myself it was an emotion. A father watching his daughter experience something good, feeling the particular complicated pride of having been the one to provide it. I was always good at finding the interpretation that required the least amount of fear. That evening after dinner, after Christian had helped clear the table and insisted on washing the dishes, despite my protests after my father had said his goodbyes and driven home, I took Lily upstairs for her bath and her 2 chapters and the inevitable negotiation about the lamp. When I finally turned off the light and stood to leave, she spoke from the dark. "Is Christian coming back?" she asked. Maybe I said, "Why?" "I hope so," she said. Her voice was the soft, slow voice of someone 3/4 asleep, words arriving with the loose precision of a mind releasing its grip on the day. She pulled Gerald tighter against her chest. He told me we could have a special secret, just him and me. Something moved through me, small and cold and quick there and gone before I could properly feel it. "What kind of secret, baby?" "The fun kind," she murmured. "He said he would tell me next time." I kissed her forehead. I straightened. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her in the faint light from the hallway, her small face soft and unguarded, her hand loose around Gerald's ear. In the hallway, I pressed my back against the wall. That small cold thing moved through me again. I stood with it, turning it over, trying to find its shape, trying to determine whether it was instinct or just the reflexive anxiety of a woman who had been alone long enough to be suspicious of good things. Then I let it go. He was kind. Lily had laughed, the real laugh, not the polite one. My father trusted him. These were facts, and I was a person who dealt in facts, and these facts were enough. They had to be enough. I had no idea then how long I would spend in the months that followed, wishing I had stayed in that hallway. Wishing I had walked back into her room and picked her up and held her until morning, and never, never let anyone come near her again. But I didn't. I walked back downstairs, and I poured Christian another cup of coffee. The moving truck arrived on a Saturday morning, which surprised me. The house next door had been empty for almost 8 months. A foreclosure someone in the neighborhood had said, though nobody knew the details. I had gotten used to the dark windows, the untrimmed hedges, the feeling of an absence on that side of the yard. So when I looked out and saw a truck backed up to the driveway, 2 men carrying boxes up the front steps, I felt something I had not expected. Relief. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment, just watching. A neighbor was a small thing. A light in a window next door at night, a car in a driveway, the ordinary sounds of another life being lived at close range. I had not realized how much I had missed those things until I saw the moving truck, and my chest did something it had not done in a while. It loosened. I baked an apple pie that afternoon. It was my mother's recipe, the one I had memorized by watching her make it every Thanksgiving until I was old enough to do it myself. I was not a particularly gifted cook, but I could make that pie. The smell of cinnamon and warm butter filled the kitchen, while Lily sat at the table drawing horses in her sketchbook, and for a little while the house felt full of something good. Christian was over that afternoon. He and Thomas were in the backyard with Lily when I wrapped the pie and walked next door. I knocked twice. The door opened almost immediately, as if the woman inside had been expecting someone. She was in her mid-60s with silver hair cut close to her head and eyes that were the particular shade of gray that looks different depending on the light. She was not a large woman, but something about the way she stood in the doorway made her seem like someone who had never been pushed around in her life. "I'm Chloe," I said, holding out the pie. "I live right next door. I just wanted to say welcome." She looked at me for a moment before she looked at the pie. Then she smiled, and her whole face changed. "I'm Clara," she said. "Come in." I stepped inside. The house smelled like fresh paint and cardboard boxes, but the front room was already more organized than mine had been in 2 years. Books lined one entire wall, a precise arrangement that told me she had done this before, moved into unfamiliar places and made them functional quickly. She put the kettle on and we sat at the kitchen table. She asked about the neighborhood, the grocery store 2 miles east, whether the street flooded when it rained hard. Practical questions. The questions of someone building a mental map of a new place. I told her what I knew, and then without quite meaning to, I told her more. About Lily, about the preschool, about the past 2 years of figuring out what our life looked like now. Clara listened without interrupting, which was rarer than people realized. "You are raising her alone?" she asked. "For now," I said, which was the answer I always gave when I did not want to explain the full truth. She nodded slowly. She did not offer the usual responses, the "you are so strong" or the "she is lucky to have you" that people said when they did not know what else to say. She just nodded, and her gray eyes stayed on my face, steady and attentive. There was something in the quality of her attention that I had not encountered in a long time. Not sympathy exactly, more like recognition. The look of someone who had sat across from difficult situations before and understood that the correct response was simply to keep looking, keep listening, and not look away. When I stood to leave, she walked me to the door. We stepped out onto the porch, and that was when she glanced past me toward my backyard. Christian was pushing Lily on the swing. My father stood nearby with his arms crossed, watching. Something in Thomas's posture was stiff in a way I had not noticed from inside the house. Clara's gaze moved from Thomas to Christian. It lingered there for a moment, still and precise the way a camera lens adjusts before it locks focus. Then it moved to Lily. "Your daughter," Clara said. "She is the one on the swing." "That's her," I said. Clara said nothing for a moment. Then, "She's a beautiful child, Chloe. You take good care of her." It sounded like a compliment. Something about the way she said it made it feel more like a warning. "Thank you for the company," she said, and went back inside. I walked home across the yard. Christian waved when he saw me, and Lily called out to watch how high she was going. I waved back and made myself smile. At the edge of my porch, I turned and looked back at the house next door. Clara was standing at the second-floor window. Her eyes were not on me. They were on Christian. She stood perfectly still, watching him push my daughter on the swing. She had her arms at her sides, and her head was slightly tilted the way someone tilts their head when they are trying to see something more clearly. She was not curious the way a new neighbor is curious. She was focused, deliberate. The way a person is focused when they are looking at something they already have a name for and are simply confirming what they know. She did not move until I went inside and closed the door behind me. I told myself she was just a sweet, curious old woman settling into a new neighborhood. But her eyes never stopped moving. The dinner was perfect. The wine was perfect. Christian was perfect. I should have known by then. Nothing that is perfect is ever real. It was a Friday evening 3 weeks after we first met. Christian had offered to cook, which surprised me. Most men I had known treated a kitchen like a foreign country. But he moved around mine with easy familiarity, finding the right pans without asking seasoning, without measuring, setting the table with Lily's favorite cup already at her place before I thought to ask. Lily sat on the counter and watched him cook. She narrated everything he did like a sports commentator, and he responded to each observation with complete seriousness, never once losing patience. When she accidentally knocked a dish towel to the floor, he picked it up without comment and handed it back to her. I stood in the doorway and watched the two of them and thought about the word family, about how long it had been since that word had felt like something real in this house. After dinner, I gave Lily a bath and read her 2 chapters of her book before she fell asleep with Gerald under one arm and her mouth slightly open. I stood at her door for a moment in the dark, listening to her breathe. There was nothing in the world I would not do for that sound. When I came back to the living room, Christian had cleared the table and opened a second bottle of wine. "You did not have to do that," I said. "I wanted to," he said. "Sit down. You have been on your feet all day." I sat on the sofa and accepted the glass he handed me. He settled into the armchair across from me, and we talked for a while about easy things. The neighborhood, a film we had both seen, a book he was reading about the history of the American Southwest. At some point, he went to the kitchen to get water, he said, and offered to make me something else. A light cocktail, just juice and a little rum, something to wind down with. I said yes without thinking much about it. He was in the kitchen alone for perhaps 5 minutes. He came back with 2 glasses and handed me mine with that same easy smile. It was sweet, slightly tart, exactly the kind of thing I would have made for myself. I drank half of it while we kept talking. 20 minutes later, I felt it. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, just a heaviness at the edges of everything, a softening of the room. I blinked slowly. My thoughts felt like they were moving through warm water. "I am so sorry," I said, pressing my fingers to my forehead. "I think the wine caught up with me." Christian smiled gently. "You work hard. You deserve to rest." I set down my glass. I meant to stand up to walk to my bedroom to be a responsible adult who did not fall asleep in front of company. But the sofa was so soft and the room was so quiet, and I was so very tired. I do not remember closing my eyes. I have tried in the months since to recall the exact moment I fell asleep. Whether there was a sound I did not register, whether something in me felt wrong before the darkness came. But there is nothing. Just the conversation, and then the morning. A clean cut between one moment and the next, as if someone had reached in and simply removed several hours from my life. What I know now and did not know then is that Christian sat in that armchair and waited. He had done this before in other houses with other women who had trusted him too easily. He knew how long to wait. When he was certain I would not wake up, he stood. He walked to the entryway and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. What he took out was small and flat. A magnetic card reader, the kind used to skim electronic locks. He set it on the entry table without ceremony. Then he reached into his other pocket and withdrew a house key. My house key, cut from the spare my father had given him weeks before I ever knew Christian's name. He set it beside the card reader, turning it once in his fingers, as if confirming something to himself. Then he walked down the hallway toward my daughter's room. I slept through all of it. I slept so deeply and so completely that I heard nothing. I did not know then what a dangerous thing that was. Before I reveal the devastating retaliation plan this traitor is about to face, drop a comment with the number 10 below to let me know you are still here and standing with Chloe. Your presence means everything to this screen. And please note, the upcoming chapters contain fictionalized elements crafted for dramatic entertainment. If that's not something you want to hear, you are welcome to turn off the video right now. She knocked over her orange juice, both hands were shaking. I had set her breakfast down the way I always did, plate on the left glass on the right fork laid across the top of the napkin. Lily reached for something, and her elbow caught the glass, and it went over the edge of the table, bouncing once on the tile before I caught it. Most of the juice was already on the floor. It was not the spill that stopped me, it was her face. She was staring at the hallway. Her hands were pressed flat against the table, fingers spread the way a child braces herself when she is expecting something loud. Her stuffed bear was tucked under her left arm, and she was holding it so tightly that the fabric of its ear was creased. "Lily," I said, setting the glass in the sink, "what is wrong?" She did not answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the hallway entrance. "Baby," I said again, softer, "look at me." She looked at me then, and I saw something in her face that I was not prepared for. Not sleepiness, not the ordinary grumpiness of a 5-year-old on an early morning. What I saw was the careful, concentrated stillness of a child who was trying very hard not to cry. I crouched down beside her chair. "What happened, sweetheart?" She leaned toward me slowly, dropping her voice to barely above a whisper. The way children whisper when they are genuinely frightened rather than playing at being secret. "He came into my room," she said. I felt my breath slow. "Who did, Lily?" She glanced at the hallway again. "Christian," she said. "He came in when it was dark. He stood next to my bed for a long time, and he went through my drawer, the one with the little key on it." The little key. The small decorative lockbox I kept on my dresser where Lily sometimes liked to put her drawings. She had decided it was her treasure box. My chest tightened. I kept my voice very level. "Did he say anything to you?" Lily shook her head. He was quiet. He thought I was asleep. "But you weren't," I said. "I woke up," she said. And then she looked at me with those brown eyes that were exactly like mine and said, "I was scared, Mommy." I do not have a word for what moved through me in that moment. Something between ice and fire. I opened my mouth. And then I heard footsteps in the hallway. Christian appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was dressed but unhurried, hair slightly damp from the bathroom. He was carrying Lily's small yellow blanket folded over one arm. His expression was warm and unbothered, the expression of a man with a completely clear conscience. "Good morning," he said, smiling at us both. He held up the blanket. "I found this on the floor next to your bed, little one. You must have kicked it off in the night." He crossed to Lily and laid it over the back of her chair, tucking it loosely around her shoulders. She went very still when he touched her, so still that I noticed. But I told myself it was shyness, tiredness, the ordinary unpredictability of small children in the morning. I stood up slowly. "She said you came into her room last night," I said. My voice was careful, even. Christian nodded, completely unbothered. He looked at me with an expression of gentle, patient explanation. "I woke up around 2 to get some water. Her door was open, which seemed odd. I went to check on her and pull the blanket up." He paused. "I hope that was all right. I should have asked first. I am sorry if I overstepped." He held my gaze. His eyes were steady and open, the eyes of a man who had nothing to hide. I looked at Lily. She was staring at her plate, moving a piece of toast in a small circle with one finger. She did not look up. I looked at Christian. He gave me a small apologetic smile. "I chose." "Of course," I heard myself say. "That was kind of you." The tightness in my chest did not go away. I turned to the stove and told myself it was nothing. Told myself Lily was tired. Told myself a good man had checked on my sleeping child the way a good man would. I told myself all of it standing at that stove with my back to both of them. I was so desperate to believe it that I almost did. She came to my door with a bag of apples. But the look on her face told me this was not a social visit. It was a Sunday afternoon. Christian had stopped by earlier and left again around 5, saying he had an overnight work trip. Something about a client in Houston, a dinner he could not reschedule. He kissed my cheek at the door and told me he would call when he arrived. I stood on the porch and watched his car disappear around the corner. Then I went back inside. 20 minutes later, Clara knocked. She was holding a brown paper bag, a few red apples visible at the top. But her posture was different from the easy, unhurried way she had carried herself at our first meeting. Her shoulders were set, her chin was level, She looked like someone who had made a decision and was done reconsidering it. Thank you, I said, reaching for the bag. She did not release it immediately. Her eyes moved past me into the house, scanning the living room the way you scan a room when you are checking whether anyone else is in it. Then she looked at me directly. Chloe, she said, keeping her voice low. Tonight, when it gets late, I need you to bring Lily to my house. I stared at her. What? She did not repeat herself. She simply looked at me with those gray eyes, patient and certain. Why, I asked. Clara, it is a Sunday night. Lily has school tomorrow. What is this about? Come to my back door, she said. Not the front. Come after 11. Bring Lily even if she is already asleep. Come upstairs to the second floor. She paused, and then she said the part that stayed with me longest. Do not turn on any lights. Do not make any noise getting there. And do not tell your father or Christian that you are coming. I felt something cold move through me. My father. She had said my father. Not Thomas, not your dad. My father, as if she already knew who he was. This is strange, Clara, I said. You have to understand how strange this is. I do, she said. She said it without apology. Then, when you get there, you will understand why I asked. She handed me the bag of apples. She looked at me for a moment longer, and there was something in her expression that I could not categorize. It was not pity. It was not alarm. It was something quieter than both. The look of someone who has seen a situation before and knows exactly where it goes if nothing changes. Then she turned and walked back across the yard to her house. I stood on my porch holding the bag of apples and watched her go. I thought about calling my father and telling him. I thought about calling Christian in Houston. I thought about a dozen reasonable explanations for what had just happened, none of which satisfied me. Clara was an older woman who had recently moved in next door. She was eccentric, perhaps. She had not been unkind. But what she was asking made no sense. After I put Lily to bed that night, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The house was very quiet. I turned my coffee cup in circles on the table and thought about Clara's eyes when she handed me that bag. The steadiness in them. The absolute absence of anything that looked like confusion or uncertainty or the particular nervousness of someone who is not sure they are doing the right thing. She had been sure. At 11:10, I got up from the table. I walked to Lily's room and stood over her in the dark. She was on her side with Gerald tucked against her stomach, breathing slowly and evenly, one small hand open on the pillow. I picked her up as carefully as I could, and she shifted, but did not wake her head, dropping to my shoulder. I carried her to the back of the house. I did not turn on any lights. I opened the back door as quietly as I could and stepped out. The night air was cool and still. The yard was dark except for the pale light coming from the house next door. I could see the second-floor window, a faint glow behind the curtain. I held my daughter tighter, and I walked toward it. The moment I looked out that window, my breath stopped. Clara had been waiting at her back door. She opened it before I could knock, which told me she had been watching for me. She took one look at Lily asleep on my shoulder and said nothing, only stepped aside to let us in. She led me up the stairs in the dark. No lights, as she had instructed. We moved slowly, my hand on the railing, Lily's weight shifting against my shoulder with each step. At the top of the stairs, Clara opened a door on the right, and I followed her into a room that smelled like cedar and old paper. The curtains were drawn except for a narrow gap in the center. Clara positioned herself at the side of the window and gestured for me to stand beside her. She moved with a precision that I did not have words for, yet the deliberate, economical movement of someone who had stood in dark rooms watching things before. Look at your house, she said quietly, and wait. I looked. For a few minutes there was nothing. Just the yard below the oak tree, the porch light I had left on the street beyond. Everything familiar and still. Lily was heavy in my arms. I shifted her to my other shoulder. And then I saw him. He came from the side of the house, not the front. Walking slowly, not rushing, not crouching. Just walking with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who believed he was not being observed. He was wearing dark clothing and a hood pulled low. In the yellow wash of the street lamp, his outline was clear, but his face was entirely in shadow. He went to the front door first. He reached out and tested the handle. Then he moved to the window beside it, standing close, tilting his head slightly, looking in through the glass. My throat closed. He moved to the side of the house, checked the side gate, tried the latch on the basement window. Then he came around to the backyard to the door I had walked out of less than an hour ago, and he stood there for a moment with his hand resting against it. He is not trying to open it, Clara said quietly beside me. Notice that. He touches but does not push. I did not understand what she meant. I was too frightened to understand anything except that a man I did not know was moving around my house in the middle of the night while I stood 40 feet away with my sleeping daughter in my arms. Then he stopped. He stood at the far edge of the backyard and looked up. I followed his gaze and my stomach dropped. He was looking at Lily's window. Her curtains were closed, but the nightlight she slept with cast a faint pink glow at the edges. He stood very still, staring up at it. He has been doing this every night for a week, Clara said. I turned to look at her, every night, from approximately 2 in the morning until 3. She kept her voice level as if she were reading from a document. He appears at the same time. He follows the same pattern. He leaves when the hour is up. I looked back at the yard. The figure had not moved from beneath Lily's window. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked. My voice came out thinner than I intended. The first night I thought it was coincidence, Clara said. Perhaps someone checking on a property. The second night I was less certain. By the fourth night I was certain enough. But I needed you to see it yourself. She paused. Some things cannot be told. They have to be witnessed. I watched him for another 40 minutes. He completed his circuit of the house twice more. He moved the same way each time. Methodical, careful. Each time he passed beneath the street lamp, the shadow of his hood fell across his face and I could see nothing. At 3 in the morning exactly, he stopped walking. He looked at his wrist. Then he turned and walked down the side of the house and was gone. I stood at the window after he disappeared. My legs felt wrong, like something structural inside them had given way. Lily stirred against my shoulder and made a small sound. I pressed my hand to the back of her head. She settled again. I have to protect her. That was the only thought I had. It filled every part of me until there was no room for anything else. I have to protect this child. I held her tighter in the dark and did not let go. The police officer on the phone was polite. He was also completely useless. I called the non-emergency line at 8 in the morning as soon as I had gotten Lily onto the school bus and come back inside. I sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup and explained everything as clearly as I could. A man in dark clothing, my yard, the same time every night, an entire week of it. The officer listened. I could hear him typing. I understand your concern, he said. That does sound unsettling, but without evidence of an actual trespass, without property damage or direct threat, there is limited action we can take at this stage. He paused. I can make a note in the system and request that a patrol car add your street to its nightly route. That is all I asked. We can increase the frequency of patrols in your area, he said. If the individual makes direct contact or attempts to enter the property, call 911 immediately. I thanked him. I set the phone down on the table. I sat there for a while looking at nothing. Clara knocked at 11. She came in without ceremony, declined the coffee I offered, and sat down across from me with the particular composure of someone who had already thought through the next several steps. The police cannot help us yet, she said. It was not a question. They said they will increase patrols, I told her. She nodded slowly. That may discourage him on some nights. It will not solve the problem. She folded her hands on the table. What we need is his face. She looked at me steadily. I would like to install cameras. I blinked. Cameras. 3 of them. One at the front of the house, one at the back, and one angled to cover the side yard beneath Lily's window. She said it the way someone reads from a checklist they have already written. If we get a clear image of his face, the police will have something to act on. I looked at her. You know how to install security cameras. She gave me a small, measured look. I know how to do a great many things, she said. May I proceed? I said yes. I did not know what else to say. She had the equipment in her car. That was the first thing that struck me as she brought it in. She had not gone out to buy it. It was already there, already prepared, as if she had known before she knocked on my door that this was what would be needed. 3 small cameras in sealed packaging, a length of cable, a compact digital recorder, and a monitor screen no larger than a hardcover book. She worked quickly and without asking for help. I followed her from room to room watching, and what I watched was not the work of someone who had once lived with a person who knew about such things. It was the work of someone who knew. She ran the cable along the baseboards with the confidence of someone who had done it in the dark, in difficult places under pressure. She mounted each camera with 3 screws and tested the angle before moving on. I could not help myself. "Did your husband teach you all this?" I asked. She looked over her shoulder at me. She had a small screwdriver in one hand and a cable clip in the other. She considered me for a moment the way a person considers whether a question deserves its full answer. "I was not married to a police officer, Chloe," she said. Then she turned back to the wall and drove in the final screw. I waited. She climbed down from the step stool and straightened, dusting her hands against her trousers. Then she looked at me directly. "I retired 3 years ago," she said. 31 years with the Austin Police Department. The last 14 as Chief of Criminal Investigations. The room went very quiet. I stared at her. She held my gaze without any particular expression, letting the information settle without rushing me through it. "Chief of Criminal Investigations," I repeated. She nodded. "Then what are you doing living next door to me?" I asked. The question came out before I could think it through. For the first time since I had met her, something moved across Clara's face that was almost a smile. "The things that brought me here are not important right now," she said. "What is important is that we know what we are dealing with." She gestured toward the monitor she had set on my kitchen counter. "Tonight we will find out more." She showed me how to operate the recording system in under 5 minutes. She labeled the 3 feeds with a piece of masking tape and a pen: front, back, side yard. Then she went home. I sat on the couch that evening after Lily was asleep, and I watched the monitor. The feeds were crisp and clear. I could see the oak tree in the backyard moving slightly in the wind, a car passing on the street, a moth circling the porch light. I watched until my eyes burned. I told myself I would give it an hour and then go to bed. At 2 in the morning, something moved on the backyard screen. I sat forward. He was there. I watched a week's worth of footage in one sitting. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, my blood ran cold. It started the day after Clara installed the cameras. I reviewed each night's recording the moment Lily left for school, sitting at the kitchen counter with the monitor pulled close and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. The hooded figure appeared every time. Same entry point from the side yard, same deliberate circuit around the house. Same stop beneath Lily's window, same departure at 3 in the morning as if he had a schedule to keep. I sent the clearest frames I could to the police. The officer I reached this time was patient but frank. "The images show an individual on a public easement," he said. "Without a visible face and without evidence of attempted entry, we cannot make an identification or an arrest." He recommended I keep recording. I kept recording. Clara came over each morning to review the footage with me. She watched in silence, occasionally asking me to rewind a section and play it again at half speed. She never seemed alarmed, which I found both reassuring and unsettling. It was the composure of someone who had seen worse and knew how to pace herself through it. Lily's nightmares started that week. The first time it happened was a Tuesday. I heard her crying at 2:30 and found her sitting up in bed, both hands pressed over her eyes, Gerald fallen to the floor beside her. When I picked her up and held her, she clung to me, but would not say what she had dreamed about. She only shook her head when I asked. It happened again Thursday night and again on Saturday. I asked the pediatrician about it. "Nightmares are common at this age," she said. Changes in routine, new people in her life, even positive changes can disrupt sleep patterns. I nodded and thanked her and did not mention the man in the hood. Christian came over on Friday evening and stayed through Saturday afternoon. He brought flowers and a board game Lily had mentioned wanting, and the 3 of us spent the evening at the kitchen table playing it with exaggerated seriousness. Lily laughed until she had to hold her stomach. I watched her laugh and felt something unknot in my chest. That night, reviewing the camera footage, I noticed something. The hooded figure had not appeared. I sat with that for a moment. Then I went back through the recordings and checked the previous Friday. Christian had stayed that night as well. I pulled up the footage. The figure had not appeared that night either. I made myself slow down. I told myself it was coincidence. 2 data points were not a pattern. People skipped nights for all kinds of reasons. Weather, other obligations, the increased police patrols on the street perhaps. But I kept looking. I made a list on a piece of paper. 2 columns. Nights the figure appeared, nights he did not. I went back through every recording since the cameras had been installed, and I filled in the columns methodically the way my mother used to balance her accounts at the kitchen table on Sunday evenings. When I was done, I sat very still and looked at what I had written. The figure had appeared on 11 nights out of 14. The 3 nights he had not appeared corresponded exactly to the 3 nights Christian had stayed at the house. Not approximately, not roughly, exactly. I took the paper to Clara. She read it without expression. Then she read it again. She set it on the table between us and looked at it for a long moment. "He knows," she said. "What do you mean?" She looked up at me. "He knows that Christian is in the house on those nights. That is why he stays away." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "The question is how he knows, and the question after that is why Christian's presence makes a difference to him." I did not have answers to either question. I sat across from Clara in her kitchen and turned both questions over in my mind and came up with nothing useful. No explanation that made the whole picture make sense. That bothered me more than I could say. I was a person who needed things to make sense. Lily cried again that night. I held her in the dark of her bedroom for 40 minutes before she fell back asleep. When I finally laid her down, I stood over her for a long time watching her breathe, watching her small chest rise and fall. The nightlight cast its pink glow at the edges of the curtains, the same glow the hooded man stood beneath every night. I thought about Clara's questions on my way back to the kitchen. He knows. Why does Christian's presence make a difference? I could not make it fit. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the window and stared out at the dark yard. Then 3 nights later, the wind shifted. I was watching the backyard feed just after 2 in the morning when a gust moved through the yard, shaking the oak tree, bending the long grass along the fence line. The hooded figure was in his usual position beneath Lily's window, and for just a moment the wind caught the edge of his hood. I sat forward, my hand moved to the mouse. I pressed pause. It was just a gust of wind. 1 second. That was all it took to shatter everything I thought I knew. I sat at the kitchen counter with my hand on the mouse and the image frozen on the screen. The hooded figure stood beneath Lily's window, his head turned slightly to the left. The fabric of his hood caught mid-movement in the wind. A fraction of a second later, it would settle back into place. But right now in this frozen frame, the left side of his face was exposed. I clicked to zoom. The image pixelated, then sharpened as the software adjusted. I moved the slider to increase the contrast the way Clara had shown me. The shadows lightened, the edges clarified. A jaw, a cheekbone, the curve of an ear. I zoomed again. The face of a man in his mid-30s looking up at my daughter's window. His eyes were set deep above hollowed cheeks. There were dark circles beneath them, the kind that come not from one bad night, but from many. His mouth was pressed into a thin line. He looked like someone who had not slept properly in a long time. Like someone carrying something heavy he could not set down. I knew that face. I had known it for 7 years. My hand moved away from the mouse. I sat very still for a moment looking at the screen. Then I picked up my phone and called Clara. She was at my door in under 3 minutes. She looked at the screen without speaking. She leaned in close, studying the image the way she studied everything with the same unhurried, thorough attention she brought to all things. Then she straightened. "You know this man," she said. "It was not a question." "That is Jake," I said. "My ex-husband." The words felt wrong coming out of my mouth. Not because they were incorrect, but because they did not explain anything. They only made the picture more confusing. "He left 2 years ago," I said. "He went overseas for work. We divorced. I have not seen him since. Why would he be standing outside my house every night? Why would he be looking up at Lily's window?" My voice had risen without my meaning it to. I pressed my fingers against my mouth and made myself breathe. "Why would he do this?" I asked again, quieter. Clara looked at the image on the screen for another moment. Then she said, "Go back to the beginning of the footage from tonight. I want to watch his whole approach." I did what she asked. We watched Jake come around the side of the house, move to the front door, test the handle, move to the front window and look in, come around to the back door. "Stop," Clara said. I stopped the playback. She pointed. "Look at his hand," she said, "on the door handle. What is he doing?" I looked. Jake had his hand on the back door handle, but he was not pulling it. He was not pushing it or jiggling it. He was pressing something against the door frame beside the handle, something small, pressing it into place with careful, deliberate pressure. He is adding a secondary lock, Clara said quietly, a mechanical bar lock fitted to the exterior frame. She paused. He brings it each night, installs it while he is here, and removes it before he leaves. I stared at the screen. He is not testing the door to find a way in, she said. He is reinforcing it to keep someone else out. The room went very quiet. I thought about the nights Jake had not appeared. The nights Christian had been here. I thought about the pattern I had written in 2 columns on a piece of paper, the perfect inverse relationship between the 2 men. I thought about Clara's words from 3 days ago. He knows that Christian is in the house on those nights. That is why he stays away. He was not staying away because he was afraid of Christian. He was staying away because when Christian was inside, he could not reinforce the locks from the outside without being seen. He was staying away because he was not trying to threaten this house. He was trying to protect it. From Christian. The thought arrived fully formed, and with it came something I had no name for. Not quite fear, not quite understanding. Something between the two, a cold and disorienting space where everything I had believed for the last 2 weeks no longer held its shape. Clara was still watching the screen. Why, I said. Why would Jake be protecting this house from Christian? They have never met. He has been out of the country for 2 years. How would he even know about Christian? Clara turned to look at me. Her expression was careful. I think she said that your former husband knows something about Christian that you do not. I looked at the frozen image on the screen. Jake's face haggard and determined beneath the street lamp. The face of a man who had been standing in the cold in the middle of the night for weeks, doing something no one had asked him to do for a child who did not know he was there. He wasn't trying to get in. He was making sure no one else could. My hands were shaking when I picked up my phone. I dialed his number for the first time in 2 years. The phone rang 4 times and went to voicemail. His voice on the recording was the same as I remembered it, low and unhurried. He had always spoken like someone who did not feel the need to fill silence. Hi, you've reached Jake. Leave a message. I did not leave a message. I did not know what to say. I set the phone face down on the counter and stared at the ceiling for a moment, then walked back to where Clara was still studying the monitor. Play it again, I said, from the beginning. She did. We watched Jake's full circuit in silence. He came around the side of the house, moved to the front door, tested the handle with that same precise, non-destructive touch Clara had noted the night before. He moved to the front window, checked the side gate, came around to the back. This time I watched his hands instead of his face. Clara had been right. At the back door, he pressed the additional lock bar into place with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it many times. At the basement window, he did something I had not noticed before. He crouched and ran his fingers along the lower edge of the frame, checking the seal, making sure it had not been disturbed. He is inspecting entry points, Clara said. Each night he checks whether any of the locks he set the previous night have been tampered with. The implication of that settled over me slowly. He was not just securing the house. He was checking whether someone had tried to get in while he was gone. Go to the footage from last Thursday, Clara said. I scrolled back. Clara leaned forward. There, she said. Pause it. On the screen, Jake had stopped at the corner of the house near the electrical meter. He was holding something in his right hand, a small device, rectangular palm-sized. He was moving it slowly along the exterior wall at window height. What is that? I asked. Clara looked at me. An RF scanner, she said. A radio frequency scanner. It detects wireless transmission signals. I did not understand for a moment. Then I did. Someone put a listening device in my house, I said. The words came out flat like I was reading them from a page. She walked to the living room without further comment and stood at the window for a moment, her back to me. When she turned, something in her expression had shifted. That device we found in the smoke detector, she said. Jake's scanner would have detected its transmission signal from outside. He knew it was there. He has known for some time. She picked up the disc from where it still sat on the counter between us and looked at it once more. Then she set it back down. He had been listening, I said, to everything. Every conversation in this hallway, every time I called my bank, every time I talked to my father. Every time Lily talked, Clara said quietly. I put my hand over my mouth. I thought about the nights Christian had sat in my living room asking careful questions about my mother's estate, about the lockbox in my bedroom, about where I kept the important documents. He had asked the questions gently framed as interest, as the natural curiosity of someone building a future with a person. And I had answered. I had answered all of it. And somewhere in my smoke detector, a device had been transmitting every word. I looked at Clara. Jake knew about this, I said. She nodded. He has been scanning for it. Whether he found it or simply detected the transmission signal, he has known for some time. For some time. While I was pouring Christian coffee and thanking him for checking on my daughter, Jake had been standing outside in the dark with an RF scanner, methodically sweeping the perimeter of my house, trying to protect information I did not even know was being stolen. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Not because I planned to. My legs simply decided they were done. Clara stood quietly in the kitchen and let me sit there. She did not offer reassurance or rush me. She had the particular patience of someone who had sat with people in bad moments before and knew that some things simply needed a minute. I thought about Lily crying at night, about her small, still face at the breakfast table, about the way she had gone rigid when Christian laid that blanket across her shoulders. She had known something was wrong. She had tried to tell me. I had chosen not to hear it. My phone buzzed on the counter above me. I reached up without standing and looked at the screen. Jake! I pressed accept and put the phone to my ear. The line was quiet for a moment. Then he said my name just once in a voice that sounded like someone who had been waiting a long time to be called. Chloe. I closed my eyes. Tell me everything, I said. The line was quiet for just a moment. Then he exhaled slow and controlled the way someone exhales when they have been holding their breath for a very long time. I heard you the first time you called, he said. I just needed a second. Where are you? I asked. Parked on Elm Street, 2 blocks from your house. I started driving when you called. He had been that close. He had been 2 blocks away for weeks, coming to my yard in the dark, and I had not known. I did not know whether I wanted to scream at him or cry. I settled for neither. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and kept my voice as level as I could manage. How long have you been back in Austin? I asked. About 7 weeks, he said. 7 weeks. The cameras had been recording for 12 days. He had been here for 7 weeks before Clara and I had even known to look. Why didn't you come to the door? I asked. Why didn't you call me? Why didn't you do anything except stand in my yard in the middle of the night like a... Chloe. His voice was quiet, not sharp, just quiet in the way that stops you. I stopped. Because you would not have believed me, he said. And I did not have time to convince you. I needed to move fast, and I needed you and Lily to be safe while I did it. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment. Clara stood at the kitchen window with her arms folded, looking out at the backyard, giving me what privacy she could in a small kitchen. Who is he? I asked. The man my father introduced to me. Who is he really? Jake was quiet for a moment. His name is not Christian, he said. His real name is Jace Miller. He has used at least 4 other names before that one. I wrote the name on the back of an envelope that was sitting on the counter. Jace Miller. 2 words that meant nothing to me and apparently meant everything. How do you know this? I asked. When I got back and saw you with him, something felt wrong. He paused. The way he looked at Lily. I cannot fully explain it. Something in my chest just said no. So I called a friend, an attorney who has connections in federal records. I asked him to run the name. Christian, I said. He shook his head. I only had a face at that point. My friend has resources. It took him a few days. Clara had turned from the window and was watching me now. Her gray eyes moved from my face to the envelope where I had written the name, then back. What did he find? I asked. Jake said. He has a criminal record in 2 other states. Fraud primarily. He targets women with inherited assets. Single mothers specifically. He moves from state to state and he changes his name each time. The room tilted slightly. I put my hand flat on the kitchen floor. The house, I said. My mother's house. Yes. The documents in my lockbox, I said. Yes, Jake said. That is what he is after, among other things. The way he said among other things made the air leave my lungs. Lily, I said. There was a pause that told me everything before he spoke. There are other charges, he said carefully, from 6 years ago in another state, involving a child. He managed to avoid conviction on a technicality, but the record exists. I was gripping the phone so hard that my fingers had gone white. Clara was at my side now, her hand on my shoulder, steady and grounding. He has a key to my house, I said. Someone gave him a key. He has been getting in when I am asleep. Lily told me he came into her room. I know, Jake said. I have footage of him using the key, the back door, usually between 11:30 and midnight on nights he tells you he is traveling. I thought about the cocktail. the heaviness that had crept in at the edges of the room, the clean cut between sitting on the sofa and waking up in the morning. He drugged me, I said. I believe so, Jake said. I have not been able to confirm it, but the pattern of his entries is consistent with you being incapacitated. The word incapacitated landed like something physical. Who gave him a key to my house, I asked. Jake was quiet. Just say it, I said. Whatever it is, just say it. He said, Chloe, I need you to go look at something before we talk further. Go to your father's office. The home office, not his study. Why? There is a drawer on the left side of his desk, Jake said. Check what is in it. I knew even before I went. Something in the deliberate way he said it told me that whatever I was going to find had already broken something in him when he found it himself. My father, I said. Go look, Jake said gently, then call me back. I set the phone down. Clara was already watching me. She had heard enough. She said nothing. She simply moved aside so I could stand. And I walked out of my kitchen toward my father's house with the name Jace Miller written on an envelope in my hand, and the worst suspicion I had ever carried settling into my chest like something that had been there all along. He was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall, which I remembered was always how he preferred to sit. He saw me the moment I walked in. He did not wave or stand. He just held my gaze across the room and waited the way he had always waited, with more patience than I had ever known what to do with. I sat down across from him. He looked worse up close than he had in the footage. The dark circles were deeper, the hollows of his cheeks more pronounced. He had lost weight. His hands around his coffee cup were rougher than I remembered the hands of someone who had been doing physical work in cold weather. Overseas, I said. 2 years, what were you doing? Construction management, he said. Infrastructure projects in South Korea, then the Netherlands. Long hours, high pay. He said it simply without embellishment. I waited. I was saving, he said. Not for myself. I had an account I was not touching. Enough for a down payment on something better than what we had. A yard with more room. A school district with better ratings for when Lily got older. He looked at the table. I was going to come home and surprise you. 2 years of saying not yet to every expense so I could say yes to one big thing. I thought about the empty chair at my kitchen table, about the years of reading absence as abandonment. Thomas told me you had someone else, I said. Jake nodded slowly. He called me regularly while I was away. At first the calls seemed kind. He would give me updates about you and Lily. Then the updates started changing. He said you were struggling, that you had told him you needed a clean break, that coming home would only make things harder for everyone. He paused. I believed him, Jake said. He was your father. I thought he knew things I did not. Something cold moved through me. By the time I understood what he was doing, it was too late. The papers had already been filed. He pulled a folder from the bag beside his chair and set it on the table between us. This is what my attorney friend found when I asked him to look into Thomas's finances. It took a while to trace. The transactions were structured to look like loans. I opened the folder. Bank statements annotated. Wire transfers going back 18 months. And a single sheet with handwritten terms that made my stomach turn. He owed Christian a great deal of money, Jake said. Gambling. It had been going on for years. I already knew some of this. The drawer I had opened at Thomas's house the night before had told me enough to confirm what Jake had suspected. But seeing it laid out in documented form was different from suspecting it. It was the difference between thinking a floor might give way and feeling it go beneath your feet. Tell me about Lily, I said. Tell me what you saw. Jake set down his coffee cup. About 2 months ago, he said I went to her preschool during pickup. Thomas usually brought her home, but he had called to say he was running late. So I went. He stopped. She came out of the building and she saw me and she ran. She hit me at a full sprint the way she used to when she was 2. He smiled faintly at the memory, and then the smile faded. When I picked her up, I noticed a small bruise on her wrist. I asked her what happened. I held very still. She said Christian made her play a game at night, Jake said. Finding keys and putting them in a bag. She said she was scared to say no because he told her something would happen to her mother if she did. I pressed my hands flat on the table. She was 5 years old, I said. She's 5 years old, he said. Yes. We sat with that for a moment. I called my attorney friend that afternoon, Jake said. Gave him the name Christian and a description. It took him 4 days to match the face to a federal file. Jace Miller has operated in 3 states. The asset fraud pattern is identical each time. Single mothers with estates. He gains access through a trusted family member who has a financial motive. He looked at me steadily. I needed to gather enough evidence for the police to act, he said. And I needed to be careful. If Jace felt threatened before we had enough, he would disappear. He has done it before. How did you find Clara? I asked. I did not find her, Jake said. She was already there. The house next door went vacant 8 months ago. When I came back to Austin and started watching your street, I ran her plates out of habit. He paused. She is not easy to miss if you know what to look for. I knocked on her door and told her what I knew. She asked me how much documented evidence I had, he said. At that point, not enough. We agreed that approaching you too early before we had something concrete would only warn Jace and give him time to disappear. So we waited. We built the record first. Then Clara came to you. And she agreed to help you. She did not agree immediately, Jake said. She asked me a great many questions first. Then she agreed. He reached into the folder and took out a business card. He slid it across the table toward me. Detective Victor Reyes, I read. Special Victims Unit, Austin Police Department. Victor worked under Clara for 9 years, Jake said. He already has the file. He has been waiting for us to have enough to move. I looked at the card in my hand. All of it. The house next door, the cameras, the RF scanner, the weeks of footage. None of it had been accidental. They had built something around us while I was sleeping, and they had done it to keep my daughter safe. Please sit down, Ms. Chloe, Detective Reyes said. His voice told me I needed to. He was younger than I had expected. Early 40s with close-cropped hair and the kind of stillness that comes not from personality but from training. He had worked special victims for 11 years, Clara had told me on the drive over. He had seen things that most people never see, and he had learned to carry them without letting them show on his face. When he looked at me across his desk that morning, his expression was measured and precise. It was the expression of someone about to deliver information that required all of his professional discipline to deliver calmly. Clara sat beside me. She had not asked if she could come, she had simply gotten into the car. Detective Reyes opened a folder on his desk. He turned it to face me. The individual you know as Christian, he said, has been operating under a series of assumed identities for approximately 11 years. His legal name, the one on his original birth record, is Jace Allen Miller. He has used at least 6 other names in that period. He paused. We have confirmed activity in Florida, Georgia, and now Texas. I looked at the folder. There was a photograph clipped to the top left corner. Christian's face, but younger. Sharper somehow, less polished. The photograph of a man who had not yet perfected his performance. The pattern is consistent across all 3 states, Reyes said. He identifies women who have inherited significant assets, typically real property and liquid savings. He establishes a relationship through a trusted third party, someone with a pre-existing financial motive to facilitate access. He gains proximity to the household and begins the process of documentation theft. He paused. In 2 of the 3 prior cases, there were also children in the home. The air in the room changed. Were those children, I began, and then I could not finish the sentence. In one case, there was sufficient evidence for charges, Reyes said carefully. In the other, the family declined to cooperate with prosecution. He looked at me steadily. Both children received psychological support afterward. I looked at Clara. She was looking at the desk in front of her. The listening device recovered from your smoke detector, Reyes continued, is consistent with commercially available covert surveillance hardware. We have logged it as evidence. Combined with the camera footage of the unauthorized entry which Mr. Jake compiled over the past 7 weeks, we have documented at minimum 3 counts of breaking and entering. He paused. The fact that he used a key provided by a third party does not reduce the criminality of the entry. He did not have your permission. That is what matters legally. He used a key my father gave him, I said. Yes, Reyes said. He kept his voice neutral. About that. He turned to a second section of the folder. Bank records. I recognized the format from the documents Jake had shown me at the cafe, but these were official copies stamped and annotated in the margins. We obtained these under a financial investigation warrant this morning, Reyes said. Your father's primary account shows a series of structured deposits over a period of 14 months. The final settlement received 6 weeks ago represents the full discharge of a debt incurred through gambling losses. He let me read the number at the bottom of the page. In exchange for that discharge, your father provided Jace Miller with access to your property, including a copied key, and with detailed information about the contents and location of your mother's estate documents. I read the number again, then I set the paper down. He sold us, I said. The words came out very quietly. He sold his daughter and his granddaughter to clear a gambling debt. Reyes did not offer condolence or contradiction. He simply let the statement stand. What happens now? I asked. We are close to having sufficient grounds for simultaneous charges against both individuals, Reyes said. We need two things. First, we need Jace Miller to make one more documented, unauthorized entry, so we have him on video on your property without permission in real time. He looked at me carefully. We would like your cooperation in facilitating that. You want to set a trap, I said. We want to be present when he comes back, Reyes said. Which we believe he will. He has not yet secured what he came for. Your mother's will and property deed are still in your lockbox. Until he has those documents, he has reason to return. I nodded slowly. The second thing, Reyes said, and his voice shifted slightly. He leaned forward. Ms. Chloe, I would like you to take Lily to see someone. A colleague of mine, a child psychologist who specializes in trauma response in young children. He held my gaze. Based on what Mr. Jake has described and based on the duration and nature of Jace Miller's contact with your daughter, I believe it is important to understand what Lily has experienced. How important, I asked, though I already knew the answer. He said it directly, the way someone says a hard thing when they have learned that softening it only delays the pain. Important enough that I would ask you to go today if you can. Clara put her hand over mine on the armrest. I looked at Reyes. I looked at the folder on his desk. I looked at Christian's younger face in the photograph, the face of a man who had done this before and intended to do it again and had chosen my daughter to do it to. I understand, I said. I stood up, I thanked him, and I walked out of that building to go get my little girl. The child psychologist spoke in a calm, steady voice. I gripped the armrest of my chair until my knuckles went white. Her name was Dr. Sandra Okafor. She had an office on the 3rd floor of a building on West 6th Street with soft lighting and a couch the color of sand, and no sharp edges anywhere in the room. The kind of office designed so that a child walking into it for the first time would not be afraid. There were low shelves along one wall holding small figures and miniature animals arranged in careful groupings. A sand tray in the corner. Crayon drawings taped at child height along the window frame, not framed or mounted, but simply taped casually, the way a person pins something up because it matters to them, rather than because they want it to look a particular way. The room was saying something to anyone who walked into it. It was saying, you are allowed to be small here. You are allowed to need things. Lily had looked at everything with those careful, assessing eyes of hers. The same look she had given Christian the first afternoon he came to our house. Then she had looked at Dr. Okafor, who was sitting cross-legged on a cushion on the floor with a tray of colored pencils arranged in front of her, and Lily had walked over and sat down beside her without being asked. I watched that through the small window in the door, and then I went to sit in the waiting room and did not move for 45 minutes. I have sat through difficult things in my life. The afternoon my mother was diagnosed, the day I signed the divorce papers, the night I found out what Thomas had done. But the 45 minutes I spent in that waiting room while my 5-year-old daughter talked to a stranger about things she had been too frightened to tell me were among the hardest I have ever lived through. I did not read the magazines on the table beside me. I did not look at my phone. I sat with my hands in my lap, and I waited. There was a woman across from me in the waiting room. She had a boy of perhaps 7 beside her, leaning into her arm, earbuds, and watching something on a tablet. She and I did not speak. We did not make eye contact. But at some point, she reached over and straightened the collar of the boy's jacket with one hand, the quick automatic gesture of a mother doing what mothers do without thinking. And something about that small movement broke open a space inside my chest that I had been holding closed all morning. I pressed my fingers against my sternum and breathed and looked at the ceiling until the feeling passed. Dr. Okafor came out at 2:30. She sat down across from me and folded her hands and looked at me the way doctors look at you when they have practiced what they are about to say. The good news first, she said. There is no evidence of direct physical abuse. Based on my conversation with Lily and my observations during our session, I am confident in that assessment. I exhaled, the first full breath I had taken in 3 days. However, Dr. Okafor continued, there is clear evidence of what we call psychological grooming. She kept her voice even and professional. She paused between sentences to make sure I was following. The individual in question established a relationship of trust and dependency with Lily over a period of weeks. He introduced the concept of secrets, early framing them as a special bond between the two of them. He then used that framework to give her instructions that she felt she could not refuse. The treasure hunt game, I said. She nodded. He reframed the act of taking objects from your bedroom as a game with rules and rewards. To Lily, she was participating in something that carried his approval and the promise of a positive outcome. She did not understand what she was actually doing. She paused. He also used fear as a control mechanism. If she told me, I said I would disappear. Dr. Okafor nodded again. It is a technique designed to isolate the child from the one person most likely to intervene. By making the mother the consequence of disclosure, he ensured Lily's silence. I pressed my hands together in my lap. Dr. Okafor reached to the table beside her chair and picked up a folded piece of paper. She opened it and held it toward me. During our session, she said I asked Lily to draw something that had made her feel scared recently. This is what she drew. I looked at the drawing. It was a child's drawing the way all children's drawings are. The proportions were approximate. The colors were chosen by feeling rather than accuracy, but what was in it was perfectly clear. A bed. A small figure in the bed with yellow hair, which was how Lily always drew herself. And beside the bed, a tall figure with a wide curved line for a smile and dark shading around the outline. A figure that was standing, not sitting. Standing very close to the bed in the dark, while the small yellow-haired figure lay still. I could not speak for a moment. Dr. Okafor let me look at it for as long as I needed to. She did not fill the silence. She knew he was there, I finally said. She was not asleep. She was aware of the visits, Dr. Okafor confirmed. She had been told that acknowledging them would result in harm to you. So she stayed still and she stayed quiet. She paused. That is a significant psychological burden for a child of her age. It requires a level of self-suppression that most adults would struggle with. I thought about Lily at the breakfast table, hands shaking, holding Gerald too tight, eyes going to the hallway. I had seen all of it. I had seen every single sign of it, and I had chosen the explanation that asked the least of me. I am going to tell you something, Dr. Okafor said carefully, that I want you to hear correctly. She waited until she was certain she had my full attention. What you experienced in those weeks was not negligence. It was the result of a deliberate and practiced manipulation. She held my gaze. He was skilled. He has done this before. The blindness you felt was not weakness. It was the intended product of his method. I did not say anything. I was not sure I believed her yet. But I held on to the words the way you hold on to something in the dark when you are not certain whether it is solid. What does she need now? I asked. What do I do concretely when we go home tonight? Dr. Okafor leaned forward slightly. Routine, she said. That is the first and most important thing. Children who have experienced this kind of sustained fear need to feel that the structure around them is reliable. Consistent meal times, consistent bedtimes, consistent language from you, the same words, the same reassurances spoken calmly and often. She paused. She needs to hear regularly and without drama that she is safe, that you are there, that nothing she did was her fault. She may not be ready to receive all of that yet. Say it anyway. It will land eventually. I nodded. I was making a list in my head. I was very good at making lists. It was what I did when I was too frightened to feel. She will likely have nightmares for a while longer, Dr. Okafor said. She may regress in certain behaviors. Separation anxiety is common. She may not want you out of her sight. She paused. Let her be close. Do not try to rush her back to independence. Right now, closeness is the medicine. I thought about the nights Lily had climbed into my bed and pressed her face against my shoulder and held Gerald so tightly his ear creased. I had been telling myself it was just a phase, just childhood things. It had been a child asking for help the only way she knew how. How long will she need to be in treatment, I asked. Dr. Okafor said every child is different. But she is young, and she has a strong attachment to you. Those are significant protective factors. We caught this early. She looked at me steadily. The outcome could have been much worse. I knew what she meant by that. I knew exactly what she meant. She scheduled us for the following Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that. She said she would reassess after 6 sessions, that there was no fixed endpoint, that healing did not work on a calendar, and that my job in the meantime was simply to show up consistently and let Lily lead at her own pace. I thanked her. I stood. My legs felt the way they always felt after these kinds of conversations, unreliable as though something structural had been quietly rearranged while I was sitting still. Before you go, Dr. Okafor said from where she still sat. I turned. She looked up at me. She had the expression of someone who had one more thing to say and had been deciding throughout our conversation whether to say it. She had decided. You did not fail her, she said. You were deceived by someone who is very good at deceiving people. The distinction matters, not just for you. She paused. Because the story you tell yourself about what happened will become part of the story Lily grows up inside. If you tell yourself you failed her, she will feel that version of events in ways neither of you can fully trace. She held my gaze. Tell yourself the truth instead. You were afraid, and you were alone, and someone took advantage of that. And the moment you understood what was happening, you did not stop until she was safe. I stood in the doorway for a moment. I did not trust myself to answer. Then I nodded once, and I went to find my daughter. She was in the small play area at the end of the hallway, sitting on the floor with Gerald in her lap and a set of wooden building blocks arranged in front of her. She had built something low and wide, a structure with no obvious function, but with careful intention visible in the placement of each piece. When she saw me, she stood up immediately and came to me walking fast, and I crouched down, and she put her arms around my neck and held on. I held her back. I held her for a long time in the hallway outside that office. Her small arms around my neck and Gerald hanging from one of her hands, her face pressed into my shoulder, her breathing slow and warm. I did not say anything for a moment. I just held her the way Dr. Okafor had said to, the way she needed to. Then I said quietly into her hair, "You are safe, I am here. Nothing that happened was your fault." She did not respond. She just held on a little tighter. I meant it as a promise, and I intended to keep it. I drove to my father's house with the police report in my hands and 2 years of lies in my chest. The drive was 12 minutes. I had made it hundreds of times. I knew every turn, every light, the particular way the road dipped, just before the intersection at Lamar, the gas station on the corner, where Thomas used to stop to buy me a soda when I was small, and we were running errands on Saturday mornings. I drove past it without looking. I had spent enough of my life collecting memories of a man who did not deserve them. I was not going to add any more. I had been there the night before after Jake's call, and I had found exactly what he told me I would find. The drawer on the left side of the desk in Thomas's home office. An accordion folder, the kind with multiple pockets held shut with an elastic band. Inside it, 14 months of bank statements with certain transactions circled in red ink, as if Thomas had been tracking his own guilt. A handwritten agreement on 2 sheets of yellow legal paper, unsigned but initialed at the bottom of each page. And a number at the bottom of the final page that made me stand very still in the middle of my father's office for a long time before I could move again. I had taken photographs of everything with my phone and left without touching anything else. I had driven home and sat in my car in the driveway for a while. Then I had gone inside and checked on Lily and stood over her in the dark of her room while she slept, and I had made myself feel everything I was going to need to feel before morning, because after morning I was going to need to be very clear-headed and very cold. I had stood over my daughter for a long time. The nightlight cast its pink glow at the edges of the curtains. She had one hand open on the pillow and Gerald tucked under her chin, her face soft and unguarded in the way that only sleep produces the expression of someone who does not yet know everything the world is capable of. I had looked at her, and I had thought about my mother, who had worked 30 years as a nurse and saved carefully and left everything she had to me so that Lily would be safe, so that we would never have to be afraid. My mother had trusted Thomas too. She had been gone 3 years, and she could not know what he had done with that trust. I had made a promise to my daughter in the dark of her room that night. Not out loud, not in words. The kind of promise that exists entirely in the chest, in the particular pressure of a decision settling into place. Now it was morning, I was both of those things. Thomas answered the door in his bathrobe. He looked surprised to see me, which told me he did not yet know that anything had changed. He was still operating in the version of reality he had constructed, the version where he was a man who had made some difficult choices under difficult circumstances, and where the consequences were something that happened to other people. "Come in," he said, stepping back. I came in, I did not sit down. I set the police report on the coffee table in front of him. He looked at it without touching it. "What is this?" he asked. "It is a summary of the financial investigation into your accounts," I said, "issued this morning. You should read the part on page 3, it has your name on it twice." He did not reach for it. He looked at me instead, and I watched his expression go through several versions of itself before settling on the one he had always used when he wanted me to feel that I was the one being unreasonable. "Chloe," he said, "let me explain." I waited. "I was in a difficult position," he said. "You have to understand that. The debt was substantial. There were people involved who were not patient." He paused. I did not know the full extent of what Christian was. "You knew enough," I said. "I knew he wanted access to the estate documents," he said. "I thought it was a financial matter. I thought he would take the documents, make some copies, and move on. I did not know he would hurt the child." "The child," I said. Something flickered across his face. "Her name is Lily," I said. "She is 5 years old. She is your granddaughter. And you gave a man with a federal criminal record a key to the house where she sleeps." "I was trying to protect myself," he said. "I did not have a choice." "You had every choice," I said. "You chose yourself. You have always chosen yourself. You chose yourself when you called Jake overseas and told him I wanted a clean break. You chose yourself when you told me Jake had someone else. You chose yourself when you brought Christian into our lives and handed him a key to our front door." His jaw tightened. "I did what I had to do." "You told a man where my daughter's bedroom was," I said. "You told him when I would be alone. You facilitated everything that happened in that house over the past 2 months. Every single entry. Every night he stood in my daughter's room while she pretended to be asleep because she was too frightened to move." Thomas looked away. He looked at the window at the middle distance at anything that was not my face. "I had a problem," he said quietly. "I needed help. I made decisions I am not proud of. But what was I supposed to do?" I looked at him for a long moment. He was my father. I had a specific memory of him that I had carried for 30 years. A memory from when I was about Lily's age of sitting on his shoulders at a street fair, being the tallest person in the crowd, feeling entirely safe. I had spent most of my adult life trying to reconcile that memory with the man who kept replacing it with new evidence. I was done trying to reconcile. "What you were supposed to do," I said, "is exactly what you did not do." I kept my voice very level. "You were supposed to be her grandfather. That was the one thing that was asked of you, and you traded it for a number on a piece of yellow paper." He opened his mouth. "I am not finished," I said. He closed it. "From this moment forward," I said, "you are not my father. You are not Lily's grandfather. You are a respondent in a criminal investigation, and you do not contact me, you do not contact her, and you do not contact anyone in my life. If you attempt to reach me, I will provide the documentation to support an additional charge of harassment. Do you understand?" He stared at me. His face had gone the color of old paper. "Chloe," he said, "I am your father." "You were," I said. I picked up the police report from the coffee table. I reached into my bag and took out the cooperation form Detective Reyes had given me, the one authorizing my full participation in the operation against Jace Miller and naming Thomas as a co-conspirator. I set it on my knee and I signed it. He watched me sign it. He said nothing. The room was very quiet except for the faint sound of the television in the next room, something he had left on before answering the door, voices he was no longer listening to. When I finished signing, I straightened and looked at him one final time. I wanted to feel something dramatic. Anger or grief or the particular relief that people describe when they finally walk away from something that has been hurting them for a long time. What I felt instead was a kind of flatness, the emotional equivalent of a room that has been emptied. Not peace exactly, just the absence of what had been there before. You are going to need a lawyer, I said. Not a suggestion, just a fact the way you state facts to someone who has run out of options. He looked at the cooperation form in my hands. Something moved through his expression that I could not name and did not try to. He was 63 years old, and he was sitting in his bathrobe in the house he had lived in for 20 years, and the daughter he had betrayed was standing in his living room, looking at him as though he were a stranger. Whatever he felt in that moment, he had earned it. Then I put the form back in my bag, and I walked to the door and I left. I stood on his porch for a moment before going to the car. The street was quiet. A dog was barking somewhere 2 houses down, persistent and bored. The sky was the pale, washed-out blue of an early Austin morning, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly new, whether or not it deserves to. I walked to my car. I got in. I sat with my hands on the wheel for a moment. Lily was at Jake's attorney's house. She was safe. She had eaten breakfast and was probably watching cartoons and holding Gerald and not thinking about any of this. She was 5 years old, and she was somewhere warm, and she did not have to carry any part of what I was carrying in this car right now. That was the thing I had done right. Whatever else I had failed at, whatever warning signs I had looked past, whatever explanations I had chosen because they required the least courage, I had gotten her out before he finished what he came to do. She was 5 years old, and she was safe. I did not cry in the car. I did not cry on the drive home. I had cried enough over the years for a man who had never deserved a single tear of it. I was done with that now, too. Detective Reyes laid out the plan on Clara's kitchen table the following evening. There were 4 of us. Me, Jake, Clara, and Reyes. He had a legal pad and a pen, and he wrote nothing down, which told me he had done this kind of thing enough times that the notes lived in his head rather than on paper. He spoke quietly, and with the same measured precision he brought to everything. Clara sat across from him with her hands folded. Jake sat beside me. Jace Miller does not yet know that we know, Reyes said. He has no reason to change his behavior. He will come back tonight or within the next 2 nights. He still needs the property deed and the original will. Those are the documents he has not yet been able to access. He looked at me. Your lockbox. I know, I said. We are going to let him come, Reyes said. We are going to let him enter the house, and we are going to be there when he does. He explained the positions. 2 officers from his unit inside the house in the back bedroom in darkness with the door cracked. Reyes himself in the hallway closet. Clara monitoring the camera feeds from her house next door with a direct line to Reyes. Jake at the back door outside, as he had been every night except tonight. He would have his phone in hand and a clear line of sight to the side yard where Jace Miller always appeared. And me, Reyes said at home, acting exactly as you always do. I looked at him. You want me in the house? I need the house to look occupied and normal, he said. If you leave, he may notice. He has been watching your patterns for weeks. Clara said I will be monitoring from next door. The moment he enters the perimeter, you will know. I thought about sitting in my living room knowing a man with a federal criminal record was walking toward my back door. I thought about Lily's drawing, the tall figure with the wide, curved smile standing next to a small bed in the dark. Where will Lily be? I asked. Jake said, with my attorney's family. He already has her. She thinks it is a sleepover. I looked at Jake. He had arranged that without being asked, which meant he had thought of it before I did. I nodded once and looked back at Reyes. What do? I asked. Sit on the sofa, Reyes said. Read a book. Watch something on television. Be visible through the front window so that if he checks the house before approaching, he sees normal life inside. He paused. When Clara signals, stay where you are. Do not move toward the noise. Do not open any doors. Let us do our jobs. Understood, I said. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Clara said, he will come tonight, I can feel it. Nobody argued with her. I went home at 9. I changed into ordinary clothes, the kind of clothes a person wears when they are spending a quiet evening at home. I turned on the lamp beside the sofa. I put the television on at low volume, something I would normally watch a nature documentary that required no emotional investment. I sat down with a book open in my lap and I looked at the words without reading them. At 10:30, my phone vibrated once. Clara's number, one word. Perimeter. He was in the side yard. I set the book down on the cushion beside me. I put both hands on my knees. I looked at the television screen and watched a herd of something move across a plain somewhere far away, and I breathed in and out with deliberate care, the way you breathe when you are trying to make your body understand that panic is not an option right now. I heard nothing for a long time. The house was very quiet around me. Then I heard the back door. Not a crash, not a forced entry. A small, careful, mechanical sound. The sound of a key being inserted very slowly, the way someone inserts a key when they are trying not to make noise. The click of the lock. The soft movement of the door on its hinges. Footsteps in the hallway. Light, measured, confident. The footsteps of a man who had done this before and had no reason to believe tonight was different from any other night. I sat on the sofa and I did not move. The footsteps passed the living room entrance. I stared at the television. A bird landed on a branch on the screen. Somewhere in the hallway behind me, a man who called himself Christian and whose real name was Jace Miller was walking toward my bedroom, toward the closet where my lockbox sat on the upper shelf, toward the documents he had spent 2 months working toward. I heard Rhea's voice from the hallway, clear and authoritative. Austin Police Department, do not move. There was a single second of absolute silence. Then the sound of movement, fast and panicked. The sound of someone who had spent years running, making the instant calculation that running was still the best option. Then Jake's voice from the back door outside, firm and flat. There is nowhere to go. More voices. Reyes again. The other officers. The sound of a struggle that lasted less than 30 seconds and ended with the sharp mechanical sound of handcuffs. And then quiet. I sat on the sofa. I had not moved. My hands were still on my knees. Reyes appeared in the living room doorway. He looked at me for a moment, then he said, "We have him." I stood up. My legs felt strange, as if they belonged to someone who had been very still for a long time and was only now remembering how to use them. I walked to the hallway entrance and I looked. Christian was facing the wall with his hands behind his back. One of Reyes's officers had a hand on his shoulder. His jacket was slightly torn at the shoulder from the brief struggle. His hair was no longer perfect. At some sound I made, or perhaps just sensing someone behind him, he turned his head. He looked at me, and for the first time in the 2 months I had known him, I saw his face without the performance layered over it. Without the easy smile and the patient eyes and the deliberate warmth he had deployed so precisely. Without any of the carefully constructed signals that had told me he was safe and kind and worth trusting. What was underneath was much simpler and much colder. He looked at me the way someone looks at an obstacle that has inconvenienced them. Then Reyes's officer turned him back toward the wall, and they walked him out my back door, and the night air came in cold through the open doorway, and I stood in my hallway and breathed it in. Jake appeared in the doorway a moment later. He looked at me across the hallway. "It is over," he said. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. It was not over, not entirely. There was still a courtroom ahead of us. Still testimony and documents and the long procedural machinery of justice. But the man who had stood in my daughter's room in the dark was in handcuffs now, and my daughter was at a safe house eating cereal and watching cartoons and not being afraid. That was enough for tonight. That was everything. The courtroom was cold in the way that courtrooms always are. Not just the temperature, though it was that too. The particular institutional chill of a room with high ceilings and no softness anywhere. It was cold in the way of a space that had been designed specifically to hold the weight of consequences, where the architecture itself communicated that what happened here was permanent. I had arrived early. Clara had offered to drive, and I had let her, which was unusual for me. I had always been the kind of person who needed to be the one behind the wheel, the one who controlled the route and the timing and the speed. But that morning, I had sat in the passenger seat and watched the city move past the window and said very little. And Clara had driven without filling the silence, which was one of the things I had come to understand about her. She knew the difference between silence that needed breaking and silence that needed keeping. The courthouse was a federal building on the east side of downtown. I had driven past it many times over the years without ever thinking about what happened inside. It had just been a building, the way buildings are when they have nothing to do with your life yet. Now I walked through its doors, and through the security checkpoint, and down the corridor to the correct courtroom, and every step felt deliberate in a way that ordinary steps do not. Like the kind of walking you do when you are aware that it matters where your feet land. I sat in the gallery with Clara on my left and Jake on my right. Lily was with Jake's attorney's family again, which was where she had been for the past 3 weeks of pretrial proceedings. She knew something important was happening. She did not know the details. Dr. Okafor had advised us on what to tell her and when, and we had followed that guidance carefully. The gallery filled slowly. There were people I did not recognize, journalists perhaps, or observers from the district attorney's office, or simply members of the public who followed such cases. There were two women sitting together near the front who had flown in from Georgia. Reyes had told me about them quietly the week before. One of them had a daughter. She was 11 now. I did not look at them for long. I could not afford to. Jace Miller was brought in first. He was wearing a suit that someone had brought him, dark gray, well-fitted. Even now, even here, he carried himself with the specific kind of composure that I recognized as performance. He sat down at the defense table and folded his hands in front of him, and at some point during the proceedings, he turned and looked at the gallery, and when his eyes found me, he smiled. It was the same smile he had worn the first afternoon he walked through my door. Easy, practiced, the smile of someone who had spent so long performing warmth that they no longer knew where the performance ended. I held his gaze and did not look away. Jake shifted slightly beside me. He did not say anything. He put his hand on the armrest between us, not quite touching my arm, just close. Present, it was enough. The charges were read aloud by the clerk in a flat, unhurried voice. Breaking and entering 3 counts. Unlawful use of a recording device, 1 count. Wire fraud in connection with an estate proceeding, 2 counts. Child endangerment, 1 count. Conspiracy to commit financial fraud, 1 count. And the federal charge that carried the heaviest weight, the one that Reyes had explained to me in his office 3 weeks earlier, enticement and grooming of a minor in violation of federal statute, 1 count. As each charge was read, Jace Miller's attorney entered a plea of not guilty. It was a formality that would not hold. The footage was too clear, the financial records were too complete, the testimony of Dr. Okafor regarding Lily's psychological state was too precise. After 4 days of proceedings, the jury was out for 6 hours. I spent those 6 hours in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse with Clara. We did not talk about the case. We talked about small things, the way people talk when they are filling time carefully. She told me about the house she had grown up in, a small place outside San Antonio, a yard with a pecan tree she used to climb. I told her about my mother's kitchen, the smell of cinnamon on Sundays. We did not mention the jury room or the 12 people inside it or the weight of what they were deciding. There was nothing left to do about any of that. It was out of our hands entirely, which was a fact I kept turning over in my mind like a stone I was trying to find the smooth side of. When Reyes called, I set down my coffee cup and answered on the first ring. They came back with guilty on all counts. I sat very still when the foreperson read the verdict. Clara put her hand over mine. I had thought I would feel something enormous when it came. Relief or triumph or the dramatic release that justice is supposed to produce in the people who waited for it. What I felt was quieter than that. Something that settled rather than erupted. The specific stillness of a door closing on something that had been open too long, letting out cold air into a room you had stopped noticing was cold. Thomas was sentenced separately in a different courtroom on a different morning. I went to that one too with Reyes beside me. Thomas had taken a plea agreement which reduced his exposure but did not eliminate it. His attorney argued that he had been under duress, that the gambling addiction was a disease, that his culpability was mitigated by his cooperation with investigators after his arrest. The judge listened to all of it with the expressionless attention of someone who had heard many similar arguments. 7 years, the judge said. Federal facility, no early release eligibility for the first 4. Thomas turned to look at me as they let him out. I did not know what he expected to find on my face. Whatever it was, I did not give it to him. I looked at him the way you look at something you are finished with, and then I looked away. And that was the last time I saw my father's face. In the weeks after Thomas's sentencing letters began arriving, they came from the facility where he was being held, addressed in his handwriting on the outside of the envelope. I received 6 of them over the course of 2 months. I did not open any of them. I placed each one in the envelope I kept for Reyes's office in the file labeled with Thomas's name as evidence of continued contact. His attorney received a letter from mine advising that further communication would be treated as harassment. The letters stopped after that. The day Jace Miller was sentenced, I stood in the gallery and listened to the judge read from the presentencing report. The prior incidents in Florida and Georgia, the children in those households, the families who had tried to move forward from something that could not be fully moved forward from. The judge's voice was measured and deliberate, and when he reached the sentencing recommendation, he paused for a moment in the particular way that judges pause before they say something final. 22 years, the judge said. Federal Correctional Facility. No possibility of parole. Mandatory registration as a sex offender upon release with lifetime monitoring. Jace Miller said nothing. His attorney said nothing. Then Jace Miller turned and looked at the gallery one more time. His expression was not the cold blankness I had seen in my hallway the night of his arrest. It was something I had no clean name for. Not quite angry, not quite defeat. The expression of a man who had run a calculation his entire life, who had always found a way to make the numbers work in his favor, and who was standing in the first room where the numbers had finally come out wrong. He opened his mouth. Whatever he intended to say, it did not come out as words, only a sound. Then his attorney touched his arm, and he closed his mouth, and the officers moved in, and they led him out of the courtroom through the side door. And he was gone. I sat there for a moment after the room began to empty. I looked at the side door through which he had disappeared. I thought about the first afternoon he had stood in my entryway looking at the photographs on my wall, the ceramic pot of succulents on the window ledge, asking questions that felt genuine. I thought about how good he had been at it, how I practiced, how completely I had believed the thing he was performing. I thought about Lily showing him her drawings spread across the coffee table. Lily grabbed his hand to pull him to the backyard. Lily on the swing calling out for me to watch how high she was going while he stood at the edge of the yard with that expression I had mistaken for genuine presence. I thought about all the things I would not let myself think about, and then I let them go, one by one, the way you release something you have been gripping so long your hand has forgotten how to open. Clara stood and gathered her things with the quiet efficiency she brought to everything. Reyes caught my eye across the room and gave me a single nod, the nod of a man who had seen a long process through to its end and was satisfied with the result. I stood up. I walked out of the courtroom into the corridor, and the light out there was different from inside, warmer and less institutional, and I stopped for a moment and just stood in it. Jake was waiting by the elevators. He had not come into the courtroom. He had offered, and I had told him I needed to do that part alone. He understood without asking why. He looked at me now across the corridor. He did not say anything, he simply held open his arms. I walked toward him. And when I reached him, I stopped trying to hold myself together, which I had been doing for 2 months and which had required more effort than I had known I had, and I let everything I had been carrying come apart at once. Standing in the corridor outside a federal courtroom, with my forehead pressed against my ex-husband's shoulder and his arms around me, and the long, exhausting work of survival finally done. He held me until I was ready to let go. We stood there for a while. People moved past us in the corridor. Someone's phone rang. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. The ordinary world continued at its ordinary pace, indifferent to the fact that something enormous had just finished inside a room 30 feet away. When I finally stepped back, I did not feel the way I had expected to feel at the end of something like this. I had imagined in the months of waiting and preparing and holding myself together that the ending would feel like an arrival, like standing at the top of something and being able to see in all directions. What it actually felt like was simpler than that. Like setting down a weight I had carried so long, I had stopped noticing its shape. Not triumph, not closure. Just the quiet, unremarkable sensation of my hands being empty and the slow understanding that they could now hold something else. Clara appeared beside us. She looked at me for a moment, then she said simply, "Good," and turned toward the exit. Reyes shook Jake's hand, then mine. He said he would be in touch about the documentation, the final filings, the procedural remainder of things. His voice was professional and warm in equal measure, the voice of a man who cared about the outcome, but understood that the outcome was never quite the ending people imagine it to be. Then it was just Jake and me in the corridor, and the afternoon outside, the tall windows was bright and ordinary, and somewhere across the city, our daughter was sitting in someone else's kitchen, eating something she liked and holding Gerald and not being afraid. Then we went to get our daughter. Looking back, I understand now that the deepest wound did not come from a stranger. It came from my own father, a family betrayal so calculated, so cold, that I almost did not survive it. I was blind. I was lonely. And I let that loneliness make decisions that nearly cost my daughter everything. Do not be like me. Do not let the silence of an empty house convince you that anyone willing to fill it deserves your trust. Loneliness is not a reason to lower your guard. It is exactly when you need to raise it. The people who mean you harm rarely arrive looking dangerous. They arrive looking like answers. My personal belief is simple tolerance of a traitor is a betrayal of everyone who genuinely loves you. The moment you discover a family betrayal of this magnitude, the only righteous response is clarity, cold, deliberate, and without apology. Protecting your child is not cruelty. It is the most sacred thing you will ever do. I also believe that God does not abandon the people who fight for their children. He placed Jake 2 blocks away in the dark. He moved Clara into the house next door at exactly the right moment. What looked like coincidence was something else entirely. This family revenge was not mine alone to carry, and I was never meant to carry it alone. This story was painful to live. But if it saves even one mother from making the choices I made, then it was worth telling. That is the only family revenge that truly lasts, not punishment but truth. And truth, no matter how brutal the family betrayal that preceded it, always finds its way to the light. If this story moved you, drop a comment below and tell me what stayed with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe these stories matter, subscribing to the channel is the simplest way to make sure you never miss one. Thank you so much for staying until the very end. It means more than I can say. Heads up, upcoming stories contain dramatized fictional elements built for reflection and education. If that is not your kind of content, no hard feelings, step away and find what fits you best.
Don't pity me. My heart doesn't need your mercy. I can still stand on my own. I was broken by your leaving, fell deeper than I thought I would. But pain has taught me how to heal now and survive what once I couldn't. You don't have to look back sadly, don't reach out with guilty hands. What you shattered made me stronger. Now I rise where I once collapsed. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. I once begged for your affection. Now I've learned my worth in scars. And the man you left in pieces found his own way through the dark. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll learn to breathe again. So keep your sympathy behind you. I don't need what's left undone. Sometimes losing who once broke you is how healing has begun. My heart doesn't need your pity, not another empty sign. I've got enough strength left within me to rebuild this life of mine. My feet are steady through the sorrow. I can stand through all the pain. You don't have to save me, darling. I'll rise alone again. I'll rise alone again. I'm freezing. I'm bleeding, slowly fading away. But don't worry, I'm fine. The cold has settled in my heartbeat, like winter living in my veins. Every breath feels numb and fragile. Every smile just hides the pain. I'm breaking quietly in silence, falling slow without a sound. Yet I keep saying I'm okay, while my world burns to the ground. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. Maybe pain just learned to live here. Maybe sorrow feels like home. So I wear my wounds like armor and survive them all alone. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. If you ever see me smiling, no, it's just my last defense. 'Cause sometimes love means hiding how much you're suffering. I'm frozen here, I'm bleeding slowly, dying piece by piece inside. But I still whisper, it's alright, just to keep you from goodbye. I'm shattered, love, but don't you worry. I'll pretend till my last breath. Even while my soul is fading, I'll say everything's okay. It's okay.